I began making a game like 3 or 4 months ago, and while I had gotten a lot done in the first few weeks, my progress quickly ground to a halt. Anytime I wanted to work on it, I just couldn't figure out what to do, and then I quickly got bored and did other things. But after finishing my last project, Tower of Llama, I figured that it was time to do something about it. I gave myself 1 month to get my game to a much better place, where I could then continue to work on it. I was going to finish this game if I died trying. Spoiler, fortunately I don't die. So it's the first week? Well, you gotta get started somewhere, or you'll end up like Abraham Lincoln, dead. The goals I had for week 1 were 1 to update 3 of the weapons and create unique shooting animations for each one, 2 to begin making a few enemies, and 3 to start creating the pathfinding system for the enemies that'll need it in the future. The first thing I did in week 1 was creating an enemy, the Sprinter. I created this glorious placeholder sprite for it. It just runs at the player and it doesn't actually use any pathfinding. It just texts at the players to the right of it, which makes it run to the right, or to the left of it, where it runs to the left. So if the player is below the Sprinter, then it will just run back and forth above the player. It has the IQ of a rock, but it still gets the job done. If Mr. Sprinter Boy runs into the player, it makes both itself and the player get knocked back. Next, I updated the shotgun. I made it shoot more bullets in a random spread, which is a huge improvement over the old one. I also added the shooting animation to the shotgun, which turned out pretty good, but I might end up redoing it or at least making some tweaks later on. I also made some placeholder sounds of SFXR just for fun, and it makes shooting feel so much better. So the third goal I had for this week was to create a pathfinding system for the enemies, so that's what I did next. I followed a tutorial made by Heartbeast to create a pathfinding grid that works for flying enemies. Then I tried making a pathfinding system for the gravity affected enemies and failed miserably. Pathfinding for platformers is actually pretty freaking hard. It is going to have to happen at a future date because I can't seem to figure it out. But based off that first pathfinding system, the one that actually worked, I created the second enemy. It's just this placeholder sprite that follows you semi-creepily. Finally, for this week, I made a shooting animation for the pistol. So that just about wraps up everything for week 1. I've reached my first goal, updating 3 guns, because I already had an updating shooting animation for my burst AR, and I made some for the shotgun and pistol. I reached the second goal of starting work on a few enemies, the Sprinter and the Flyer. Those are both placeholder sprites and names, by the way. But I didn't quite reach my third goal, pathfinding. While I was able to make one for flying enemies, I couldn't do it for the much more difficult gravity-based pathfinding. It's a week 2, and I am ready to hopefully, maybe, possibly get some stuff done. Maybe. My goals are finishing the already started enemies and making a few more, and hopefully making the platforming things semi-work and adding a bit more juice to combat. For week 2, I first of all created a simple debug tool that lets me spawn in enemies. Then I created a nice looking flying animation for the flying enemy. It took me a very long time to make this animation, probably longer than it should have taken me. I also made the flying enemy shoot at you in order to add a bit more challenge to fighting it. Then I made the third enemy, who teleports to a spot that has a line of sight to the player and then shoots to the player. The new enemy, which I'm just going to call a teleporter, actually teleports to nodes that I created for the gravity-based pathfinding system. The nodes are actually invisible and on top of each block that makes up the stage. Then it checks the line of sight to the player by just drawing a collision line between the player and the enemy and making sure there is no wall there. Speaking of the pathfinding system, I actually figured out why it isn't working. First of all, I created a player target object that the pathfinding enemy follows that stays inside the nodes. But the main problem with pathfinding was a very stupid bug. Welp. So I have this old messy knockback script for my enemies. It takes a while to copy and doesn't work sometimes. So I fixed that. I made a much simpler, better, and easier to copy script for knockback. I then added that knockback script to the flying enemy and made that enemy get stunned for a moment when shot. I also made it a slightly better, but still not final sprite for the teleporting enemy. Overall, week 2 I continued to create enemies and to polish the already created enemies. I also got the pathfinding system to work, though I don't plan on finishing that in that video. That is a topic for another time. Though week 2 wasn't as successful as week 1, I still got a lot done. Guess what? It's Christmas week. But it's also week 3, and I have a lot to get done before the end of the month. And the best way to get stuff done is to do it. So obviously I got nothing done for the next 2 days. But eventually I began setting up room settings and the actual layout of the stage. And well, the layout is kind of, how do I put it, awful right now? But whatever, I promise it'll get better. Maybe. Next up, I did some boring backbone stuff that I desperately needed to do. First of all, I made each room assign itself a number when it's created. This value helps instances define their room and position, which basically means enemies can now tell where they are. Then I made enemies disable themselves when the player leaves their room. So one thing I wanted to make was locking doors that close whenever the player is in combat. I don't plan on putting these on every door in the game, but for bosses and other stuff like that, it'll be very useful. So how I decided to do this was by simply having the player check if there were any enemies in the room with it, and then it sets a global in combat variable to true if so. Then I made a door object, which becomes active whenever the player is in combat. The difficult part of this was actually just trying to make the door not close and crush the player. The only way I could think of doing this was by slightly changing the way that rooms work.
Next up, I created a new enemy, the patrolling shooting robot. He's also very simple. All he does is walk back and forth and every once in a while shoot a bullet at you like the flying enemy does. I then spent a while drawing a sprite for him, but it was too short. So I made him taller and then animated him a walking animation as well as a shooting one. I also made a camera for the game that is locked in the room that you are in, and then I made that camera nice and smooth.
So there was actually a 1 week break between week 3 and 4. I was on vacation, and I didn't do any development while on vacation. Duh. But anyway, the main goal for this first week is to create a first small area of my game. It'll have enemies and a nice tile set as well, but it obviously won't be exactly like it'll be in the final game. I would like to create a dash ability as well. First of all, I replanned the layout of the stage on this sheet of paper, and then I moved it over to the game. Then I made the absolute basics of the dash ability. It just moves you in the direction that you're facing quickly. Then I adjusted the speed and distance of it to make it feel better. The next thing I eased into was making the dash ease in. Anyway, then I added this cool trail effect. It just works by creating objects that are just blue versions of the player that fade away during the dash. The last ingredient for the dash is simply a speck of screen shake. Anyway, I made several tile sets, like 4 or 5 that didn't work out. And I was about to settle for the 5th one, but at the last second, on the last day, I decided to try making one again. And well, it ended up being definitely the best one and the one I ended up going with. For the rest of the week, I simply polished up the enemies and tiled the full stage, and this is how the game is now. Well, but that was a thing. Personally, I think I really improved my game at gameplay, content, and graphics. Overall, this month has been a pretty big success. Moral of the story, if you ever find yourself unable to make any progress in your game or project or whatever it is, just give yourself an arbitrary due date. That obviously solves everything. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to like and subscribe for future content or to follow the development of this game. Also, if you have any suggestions, critiques, or just garbage that you want to say it in the comments down below. Bye.